I didn't ask for your opinion on the security architecture. I asked for a latte with oat milk, Torin sneered. The CEO of Vanguard Tech didn't even look at me as he spoke. He was too busy looking at his own reflection in the polished mahogany boardroom table. Before I could explain that the server room was overheating, he reached out and tipped his steaming cup of coffee directly over my laptop. I watched in slow motion as the dark liquid sizzled into the vents of my $3,000 company machine. The motherboard let out a tiny, dying pop. 6 months of my life, the code I had spent every waking hour perfecting, was turning into smoke right before my eyes. The entire boardroom, filled with high-level executives, erupted in laughter. They didn't see a brilliant engineer, they saw a servant. Torin wiped a tiny splash of coffee from his hand with a silk handkerchief, his face twisted in a mocking grin. "Clean this up, IT girl," he commanded, tossing the damp cloth at my feet. "You're lucky I don't charge you for the dry cleaning on my suit. Now get out, the adults are having a real meeting." I stood there, my hands trembling. It wasn't fear that made me shake, but the sheer weight of the disrespect. I was the person who kept this multi-billion-dollar company running, and they treated me like a janitor. I knelt to pick up the dripping, ruined hardware. My heart was pounding against my ribs. As I touched the keys, I saw a tiny green light flicker one last time on the side of the casing. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The spill had triggered a secret protocol I'd programmed months ago. Knowing how reckless Torin was, I had set the laptop to perform an emergency remote upload to my private cloud if it ever sensed a hardware failure. My code wasn't gone. It was already safe on a server they didn't even know existed. They thought they had destroyed my work, but they had just started their own countdown. My name is Cosima, and for 5 long years, I have been the invisible IT manager for Vanguard Tech. To the world, Torin is the genius visionary who created the most secure data platform on the planet. But the truth is, I'm the one who designed the firewall. I'm the one who built the servers from scratch. I am the architect of the very algorithm that made this company worth $1 billion. I worked in a dark office in the basement, while Torin stood on stages in Las Vegas and London, taking all the credit for my brain power. I wasn't just doing it for the company, I was doing it for my family. My husband, Eldrick, was Torin's best friend from college. He always told me to stay quiet and stay in the background. "Be grateful for the steady paycheck, Cosima," he would say whenever I complained about Torin stealing my ideas. He made me feel like I was lucky just to have a job. He told me that a quiet life was better for a woman and that I should let the men handle the public side of the business. I believed him because I loved him, and I thought we were building a future together. After the boardroom disaster, I went home early, still smelling like burnt coffee. I needed to buy a new laptop immediately to continue my work on the private cloud. I sat at my kitchen table and logged into our joint savings account. I expected to see the $50,000 we had been saving for a down payment on a house. Instead, my heart stopped. The screen showed a balance of exactly $0. Every penny was gone. I refreshed the page, praying it was a glitch, but the number didn't change. My husband had emptied our entire life savings without saying a single word to me. I waited by the door until Eldrick came home. He was humming a tune, looking happier than I had seen him in weeks. When I showed him the bank statement on my phone, he didn't even have the decency to look guilty. He just tossed his keys on the counter and shrugged. "Oh, that! I transferred the money to Torin," he said, as if he were talking about the weather. "He's hosting the Golden Executive Gala next week, and he needed a little extra padding for the event. It's an investment, Cosima. When Torin wins, Visionary of the Year, we'll be set for life." I stared at him, my voice caught in my throat. "That was our house money, Eldrick. That was my hard work. You gave it away for a party." Eldrick rolled his eyes and grabbed a beer from the fridge. "Stop being so dramatic. You're just the IT girl. You don't need a massive savings account because your betters are running the show and providing for you. Torin is my best friend. If he succeeds, I succeed. You should be happy to contribute to the family's social standing." He looked at me with such condescension that I realized I didn't even know the man I had married. The betrayal wasn't over. As Eldrick walked into the living room, his phone buzzed on the counter. A notification popped up from Torin. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. It was an email chain that Eldrick had been CC'd on for weeks. The subject line read, "Phase out protocol." I scrolled through the messages and felt a wave of nausea. Torin and Eldrick had been plotting to fire me the day after the new software launch. They wanted to get rid of the only person who knew how the system actually worked so they could keep 100% of the profits. My husband was helping his friend ruin my life. The next morning, I walked into the office feeling like a ghost. I avoided the boardroom and went straight to my basement cubicle. A few minutes later, the elevator doors opened and Torin stepped out. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my annual salary. He walked over to my desk and tossed a small white envelope onto my keyboard. "Here's a little bonus for your hard work cleaning up that coffee yesterday," he sneered. I opened the envelope. Inside was a check for exactly $50. "Use that to buy Eldrick a nice tie for the gala," Torin said, leaning against my desk. "Since you won't be attending, the least you can do is make sure your husband looks like he belongs in the room with me. We have a reputation to maintain, and I can't have him looking like he lives with a tech janitor." He laughed at his own joke, expecting me to join in. I just stared at the check, my grip tightening on the paper. He thought $50 was enough to buy my silence, while he stole my husband and my savings. As he turned to leave, I noticed the check again. It wasn't from the Vanguard Tech Company account. It was from a private account under a name I didn't recognize, Osric Holdings. I've lived in the back end of this company's servers for years, and I know every vendor and partner we have. Osric Holdings was not on any of our official lists. I waited until Torin was back in the elevator before I pulled up my terminal. If Torin was using a secret account to pay bonuses, he was hiding something much bigger than a $50 insult. I spent the next 6 hours tracing the digital footprint of Osric Holdings. My fingers flew across the keys, bypassing the very security systems I had built. Since I was the one who wrote the code, I knew exactly where the backdoors were. What I found made my blood run cold. Osric Holdings wasn't an investment firm. It was a shell company. Torin was using it to funnel millions of dollars out of Vanguard Tech's primary accounts. He wasn't just an arrogant CEO. He was a thief, embezzling money from the board of directors. The deepest secret was even more terrifying. The primary investor in Vanguard Tech was a woman named Nerissa. She was a legendary tech mogul known for her ruthless business sense and her hatred of dishonesty. Torin was stealing directly from her, but as I dug into the transaction logs, I saw that the paper trail for the missing millions didn't point to Torin. He had used my admin credentials to authorize every single transfer. If Nerissa ever looked at the books, it would look like I was the one stealing the money. I sat in the dark of the server room, the hum of the machines the only sound in the basement. Torin was framing me for his crimes. He and Eldrick weren't just firing me, they were setting me up to go to prison so they could walk away with Nerissa's money. The Golden Executive Gala wasn't just a celebration of Torin's ego. It was the finish line for their heist. I realized then that I couldn't just quit. If I left now, the digital trail would be locked, and I would be the one in handcuffs. I had to stay and fight from the inside. I arrived at work the next morning ready to start clearing my name, but the moment I stepped into the lobby, I knew something was wrong. The security guards, who usually nodded at me, stood in my way. "I'm sorry, Cosima," one of them said, looking at the floor. "Orders from the top." I tried to swipe my badge at the turnstile, but the light turned a sharp, angry red. My credentials had been revoked. I was officially locked out of the building. Before I could ask what was happening, Leland, the head of HR, walked into the lobby. He was wearing a gold watch that sparkled under the fluorescent lights. I recognized that watch. It was a limited edition piece that cost more than Leland's annual salary. He looked at me with a fake expression of sadness. "Cosima, we found some very disturbing discrepancies in the security logs," he said. "The company is launching a full investigation into digital theft and corporate espionage. Until it's resolved, you are barred from the premises." Leland handed me a cardboard box containing the few things from my desk. "Don't bother trying to call Eldrick," he whispered as I took the box. "He's upstairs with Torin, helping us verify the evidence you left behind." I looked Leland in the eye and saw the smug satisfaction there. He was clearly on Torin's payroll. They thought they had won. They thought by taking my badge, they had taken my power. They forgot that I didn't need a plastic card to control a building. I had programmed from the foundation up. I walked out of the building, but I didn't go home. I went to the park across the street and opened my personal tablet. They had locked me out of the company software, but they forgot one very important thing. I built the building's smart grid. 2 years ago, when the city was worried about power surges, I designed a custom interface for the building's electrical and cooling systems. I never put that system on the main company network because it needed to be independent for safety reasons. I entered the basement through a service tunnel used by the HVAC contractors. I wasn't an employee anymore. I was a ghost in the machine. As I sat in the humid maintenance room, I accessed the server cooling patents. I realized something that made me laugh for the first time in days. Vanguard Tech didn't actually own the servers they were using. They had been leasing them from a private infrastructure firm for years. Torin was so busy being a visionary that he never checked the ownership papers of the hardware. I pulled up the registration for that infrastructure firm. The company name was Winslow Systems. It was a tiny company I had started years ago under my mother's maiden name, just to hold my private patents. Every single server rack in the building, every cooling fan, and every high-speed cable belonged to me. Torin hadn't just fired his lead engineer, he had fired his landlord. I could shut down their entire world with a single command, but I wasn't ready to do that yet. I wanted them to feel the heat first. A few days later, a courier arrived at my apartment. He handed me a gold-embossed envelope. It was a mock invitation to the Golden Executive Gala. Inside, there was a note in Torin's messy handwriting. "We thought you'd want to see what real success looks like. Dress code is black tie, but we've authorized a support staff uniform for you if you want to come and serve drinks. It's the only way you're getting past the front door." He wanted me there to watch him receive the Visionary of the Year award for the code he stole from me. I accepted the invitation, but I didn't spend the night crying. I spent it at a small, dimly lit cafe on the edge of town. I was meeting with Silas, the company's former CFO. Silas had disappeared last year after he started asking too many questions about Torin's shell companies. Everyone thought he had retired to an island, but the truth was much darker. Torin had ruined his reputation and threatened his family until Silas went into hiding. When he saw me, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. "I knew you'd eventually see it, Cosima," Silas whispered, his hands shaking as he held his coffee. "Torin isn't just a thief, he's a predator. He finds people with talent, uses them until they're empty, and then destroys them so they can't tell the truth." Silas gave me a small USB drive. "This contains the original ledger from before he started the Osric Shell Company. It's the only thing that proves the money was moved using your credentials after he changed the security protocols." I finally had the missing piece of the puzzle. Silas leaned in closer, his voice barely a breath. "There's one more thing you need to know, Cosima. Torin didn't just embezzle the money. He set up a kill switch in the new software update you just finished. He's planning to crash the system for our biggest clients, blame it on your sabotage as a disgruntled employee, and then fix it himself to look like a hero. If anything goes wrong, the blame automatically redirects to the person with the most recent admin access. And according to the logs he faked, that person is you." I felt a chill, but then a slow smile spread across my face. Torin thought he was a genius, but he was playing checkers while I was playing chess. I knew about the kill switch because I had seen the messy code he tried to hide in the subdirectories. He was a terrible programmer. He had tried to hide the command in a logic bomb, but he had written it so poorly that it was easy to intercept. I realized I didn't need to delete the kill switch. I just needed to change the destination of the signal. "I can bounce the signal, Silas," I said, my confidence returning. I opened my laptop and began typing. I wrote a small script that would wait for the kill switch to activate. The moment Torin pressed the button to sabotage the company, the system would trace the command back to the physical device that initiated it. Instead of pointing at my old workstation, the digital trail would point directly to Torin's personal gold-plated smartphone. He was going to set a trap, and I was going to make sure he was the one who fell into it. The next day was my and Eldrick's 5th wedding anniversary. I thought maybe, just maybe, he would remember. I went to the local jewelry store where we had bought our wedding bands, hoping to find him buying a peace offering. I did find him there, but he wasn't alone. He was standing at the counter with Ottilie, Torin's sister. They weren't fighting. They were laughing and leaning into each other. Eldrick was holding a velvet box, but he wasn't looking at me. He was showing Ottilie a printed sheet of paper. I moved closer, hiding behind a display of watches. My heart shattered as I heard Eldrick's voice. "It's all here, Audley. Cosama's proprietary source code for the new firewall. It's worth millions on the open market. My best friend Torin thinks he's getting it all, but I've kept a copy for us. We can sell it to your rival firm and disappear before the gala even starts." Eldrick wasn't just betraying me for Torin. He was betraying Torin for Audley. He was selling my soul to the highest bidder behind everyone's back. What Eldrick didn't know was that I had anticipated a breach. 3 weeks ago, I had noticed him snooping around my home office. I had planted a decoy file on my personal cloud, a sophisticated piece of spyware disguised as the source code. It looked perfect to anyone who didn't know the math, but the moment it was opened on a foreign server, it would act as a beacon, broadcasting the location and the identity of the person who stole it. Eldrick thought he was holding our ticket to a new life, but he was actually holding a digital tracking device that would lead the authorities straight to him. By the next morning, the decoy code had done its job. News started leaking onto the dark web that Vanguard Tech's security was compromised. The stock price began to dip, falling 5 points in a single hour. The board of directors was panicking. At 2 a.m., my phone rang. It was Torin. He wasn't sneering anymore. He sounded like a man who was drowning. "Cosama, listen," he gasped. "The internet is breaking. Some glitch is leaking our data. I need you to fix it. Right now. My reputation is on the line." I sat up in bed, looking at the city lights outside my window. "I don't work for you anymore, Torin, remember? I'm just an IT girl who isn't aesthetic enough for your boardroom." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him packing. "I'll pay you," he finally said. "Name your price. Just make the leak stop before the markets open." I took a deep breath. $1 million, cash, wired to a private account in the next 10 minutes, or I let the whole thing burn. Torin agreed instantly. He was so desperate to save his visionary image that he didn't even argue. 10 minutes later, the notification popped up on my phone. The money was in my account. I fixed the leak by simply turning off the decoy beacon I had set. Torin thought he had bought my loyalty back, and he probably planned to cancel the wire transfer or claim I had coerced him later. He didn't realize that the fix I installed also included a permanent backdoor into his personal phone. I could now hear every word he said, even when he wasn't on a call. I spent the next few hours listening to the audio coming from Torin's phone. It was a goldmine of filth. I heard him talking to Leland about how they were going to liquidate my department's pension fund to cover their gala expenses. But the most painful part was a conversation between Torin and Eldrick. They were in Torin's office, laughing over a bottle of scotch. "She actually thinks she's getting that million," Torin laughed. "As soon as the gala is over, we'll report the transfer as theft. She'll be in a cell by Monday." Eldrick's voice came through clearly, and it was colder than I ever imagined. "She's a spineless wife, Torin. I've spent 5 years keeping her small just so you could look big. She actually believes I love her. She's a useful idiot, but once I get that promotion you promised, I'm dumping her in a cheap apartment and moving in with Audley. A man in my position needs a woman who actually has social standing, not a nerd who smells like server dust." I sat in the dark, the tears finally stopping. The pain was replaced by a cold, hard sense of purpose. I didn't scream or throw things. I simply recorded the entire conversation and saved it in 3 different locations. Then, I sent a small, encrypted audio file directly to Eldrick's personal email with the subject line, "Happy Anniversary." I watched the read receipt pop up on my screen. I could hear Eldrick's frantic swearing through Torin's phone backdoor as he realized his own words had been turned against him. The family war had officially begun, and I was the only one who knew where the ammunition was hidden. Eldrick was furious. He didn't come home that night. Instead, he called me from a burner phone, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and terror. "You think you're so smart, Cosama? You've ruined everything," he hissed. "If Torin finds out I was talking to Audley, he'll destroy me." I smiled into the phone. "He already knows, Eldrick, or he will soon, unless you do exactly what I say." I told him that if he wanted to save himself, he had to turn on Torin. He had to testify to Nerissa, the primary investor, about the embezzlement. Eldrick saw a chance to be the hero. He thought if he exposed Torin, he could take over the CEO position and leave me behind. He agreed to meet Nerissa in secret and hand over all the data I had gathered for him. He spent the whole day acting like a mastermind, telling me how he was going to save the company from Torin's greed. He actually looked me in the eye and said, "I'm doing this for us, Cosima. I'm going to be the visionary now." I just nodded and handed him the USB drive with the evidence. What Eldrick didn't know was that the data on that drive was a double-edged sword. I had carefully curated the files so that they showed Torin's crimes, but I had also included hidden metadata that implicated Eldrick as the co-mastermind. Every illegal transfer had his digital signature buried in the code. He thought he was walking into a meeting to take a throne, but he was actually walking into a trap that would ensure he went down with his best friend. He was too arrogant to realize that a nerd like me could see 3 moves ahead. The day of the board meeting arrived. Nerissa had called an emergency session at the Vanguard headquarters. I was summoned to testify as the IT witness who had discovered the discrepancies. When I walked into the boardroom, Torin was sitting at the head of the table, looking smug. He leaned over and whispered to Leland, "Watch this. The puppet is going to dance." He thought I was there to back up his story and blame everything on a server glitch that I had supposedly caused. Nerissa sat at the other end of the table, her eyes like 2 pieces of flint. "Cosima, show us what you found," she commanded. Torin leaned back, ready to play the victim. I didn't open a spreadsheet. I didn't show any technical charts. Instead, I tapped a key on my laptop and projected a live feed of Torin's private messages onto the giant screen. The room went deathly silent as the board members read Torin's words. He referred to Nerissa as an old dinosaur ripe for extinction, and called the board his personal ATM. The messages showed every detail of the embezzlement and the plan to frame me. Torin's face went from smug to a ghostly, sickly white. He tried to stand up, but his legs seemed to give out. "This is a fabrication," he shouted, his voice cracking. "She's a disgruntled employee. She hacked my phone." I didn't say a word. I just scrolled down to the part where he and Eldrick joked about liquidating the pension funds. The board members, who had their own money in those funds, looked like they were ready to commit murder. Torin finally lost his mind. He let out a roar of rage and lunged across the mahogany table, his hands reaching for my throat. "I'll kill you, you little rat," he screamed. Before he could get within 3 feet of me, a hand like a vice gripped his shoulder. It was Rafferty, the head of security. He didn't just stop Torin, he twisted his arm behind his back and shoved him down onto the table. Torin was gasping for air, his face pressed against the wood. "Get her out of here. Arrest her." Torin muffled into the mahogany. Rafferty didn't move. He looked at me and gave a tiny, respectful nod. Torin was screaming for Leland to help him, but Leland was busy trying to hide his own laptop. "Rafferty, do your job," Torin yelled. Rafferty leaned down and whispered into Torin's ear, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I am doing my job, Torin. I'm protecting the owner of this building." The room went silent again. Torin stopped struggling, his eyes wide with confusion. "Owner, I'm the owner," he gasped. Rafferty looked at me. Most people didn't know that for the last 3 years, I had been the anonymous donor paying for Rafferty's sister's cancer treatments. I had saved his family when Vanguard Tech's insurance refused to cover the costs. Rafferty wasn't loyal to the company. He was loyal to the woman who had saved his sister's life. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "You're under citizen's arrest for assault, Torin. And I think the federal agents in the hallway have a few more warrants for you." As the police led Torin out of the room, his high-priced lawyer, Dorian, tried to make a final stand. He stood up and pulled a thick document from his briefcase. "This is irrelevant," Dorian shouted, looking at Nerissa. "We have a signed contract from Cosima Winslow giving up all rights to her inventions and patents in exchange for her salary. Legally, Vanguard Tech owns her brain. Everything she's shown you is company property, and she had no right to access it." He waved the paper around like a victory flag. I walked over and took the document from his hand. I looked at the signature at the bottom. It was my name, written in my handwriting, dated 2 years ago. I pointed to the date. "This was signed on May 14th, I said calmly. "According to the records at Mercy Hospital, I was in the operating room for a minor surgery at the exact time this was supposedly witnessed and notarized." I looked at the notary's stamp on the bottom. It belonged to a woman named Claribel, who was Leland's secretary. "Claribel is already in the hallway with the police, Dorian," I added. "She's already confessed that Leland paid her $5,000 to backdate the forgery. This isn't a contract, it's a felony." Dorian's face crumpled. He dropped his briefcase and the papers scattered across the floor. He realized then that he was no longer representing a CEO. He was an accessory to fraud. Nerissa stood up and looked at me with a look of genuine respect. "I think we've seen enough," she said. "Leland Dorian, follow the officers. Cosima, stay here." Torin was officially ousted from the company, but as he was being led to the police car, he managed one last sneer. "You think you won, Cosima?" he yelled, the cameras from the local news crews flashing in his face. "Go ahead and take the company. It's a shell. I've still got my penthouse, my cars, and my estate. I'll be out on bail by morning, and I'll still be living in luxury while you're still a basement-dwelling nerd." He laughed, a wild, desperate sound, as the officer pushed his head into the car. I walked down the front steps of the headquarters and stood by the car window. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Actually, Torin, I wanted to show you this." I unfolded the document. It was a lease agreement for his 10,000-square-foot estate in the hills. "Your house isn't owned by you. It's owned by Winslow Holdings, the same company that owns the servers you were using." Torin's laughter died instantly. He stared at the paper, his jaw dropping. "You've missed 3 months of rent because you were busy buying silk handkerchiefs and limited edition watches," I said, my voice steady and cold. "As the owner of Winslow Holdings, I've decided not to renew your lease. In fact, I just signed your eviction notice for non-payment. Your furniture is being moved to a storage unit in the industrial district as we speak. You don't have a penthouse, Torin. You have a jail cell. And after that, you have the gutter." I watched the realization hit him like a physical blow as the car drove away. I went back to my apartment to find Eldrick sitting on the sofa, surrounded by packed suitcases. He had a glass of wine in his hand and a look of practiced sorrow on his face. When I walked in, he tried to squeeze out a few tears. "Cosima, thank God you're back," he sobbed. "I was so worried. I've realized what a monster Torin was. I'm so sorry I let him get between us. But look, I've saved us. I've still got the money from the side deal with Audley. We can start over. We can leave this city and be happy." I didn't say a word. I just walked over to the TV and turned it on. I played the recording from my backdoor access, the one where Eldrick told Torin I was a spineless, useful idiot, and that he was planning to dump me in a cheap apartment once he got his promotion. Eldrick's face went from sorrowful to a ghostly, terrified white. He looked at the TV and then at me, the wine glass shaking in his hand. "Cosima, I didn't mean that. I was just trying to stay on his good side. You know how he is." "I know exactly how you are, Eldrick," I said, my voice like ice. I played the next part of the recording, the part where he and Audley laughed about putting me in a mental wellness facility so they could control my shares without a fight. Eldrick realized then that there was no way out. The hero act was over. I pointed to the door. "Your bags are already packed. Get out. And don't bother checking your secret account for Audley's money. It's gone." Eldrick let out a scream of rage and scrambled to his laptop. He frantically typed in the codes for his secret offshore account, the one where he had been hiding the money from his betrayal of both me and Torin. He hit the enter key, expecting to see a 7-figure balance. Instead, the screen flashed red. A single message appeared in the center of the browser. "System error. Loyalty not found." The balance was exactly $0. Eldrick stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open in total shock. "Where is it? What did you do with my money?" he shrieked, turning on me. I didn't flinch. "I didn't steal it, Eldrick. I just redirected it. I found the list of employees Torin fired last year without severance, the people whose lives he ruined to pay for your golden executive lifestyle. I moved every penny into a medical and housing fund for them. They've already received the notifications. By the time you get to the lobby, they'll know exactly who paid for their kids' braces and their rent." Eldrick slumped against the wall, realizing he was truly penniless. He had sold his soul, his wife, and his best friend for a fortune that had vanished in a few keystrokes. He looked at me, and for the first time he saw the person I really was. He didn't see the IT girl or the nerd. He saw the woman who had dismantled his entire world without raising her voice. I handed him his coat. "You wanted social standing, Eldrick. Now you have the same standing as everyone else you stepped on. None." The next morning, Nerissa called me into the office. She was sitting in Torin's old chair, looking like the queen of the industry. She didn't waste time with small talk. "Cosima, the board has met. We've seen the damage Torin did, and we've seen how you saved us. We're offering you Torin's old job as CEO of Vanguard Tech. We'll give you a massive salary, a dedicated security team, and a seat on every major tech council in the country. We expect you'll be very grateful for the promotion." I looked around the luxurious office, the mahogany, the silk, the glass. It was everything I had spent 5 years building for a man who hated me. I looked at Nerissa and let out a slow breath. "I decline," I said. Nerissa's eyebrows shot up. "You're turning down the CEO chair? Why? You built this place." I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. "I'm not interested in being the CEO of your company, Nerissa. I'm interested in being the owner of my own." I pulled out a tablet and showed her the stock market reports. During the leak I had staged, the Vanguard stock had dropped to record lows. While Torin was panicking and Eldrick was plotting, I had been quietly using the $1 million Torin paid me to buy up the trash stocks they were dumping. Between my personal holdings and the Winslow Holdings firm, I now controlled 51% of the company's shares. I wasn't an employee being promoted. I was the majority shareholder. "I'm not accepting a job, Nerissa. I'm here to announce the new direction of my company." Torin was out on bail, and he was desperate. He thought he could still destroy the company if he couldn't have it. He went to a public library in the suburbs, wearing a hat and sunglasses to hide his face. He sat at a dusty remote terminal, thinking he could use his old master codes to trigger the kill switch and delete Vanguard's entire main database. He wanted to wipe out the work of a decade in a final act of spite. "If I'm going down, we're all going down," he muttered as he typed in the final command. He hovered his finger over the delete button, a manic smile on his face. He pressed it with everything he had. But instead of the screens going black at the headquarters, something else happened. The speakers in the library suddenly erupted with a 120 decibel alarm, a piercing, screeching sound that made everyone in the building jump. The computer screen froze, and a giant message appeared in bright yellow. "Criminal access DETECTED. GPS coordinates broadcast to FBI." The library's automatic doors clicked shut, locking him inside. I watched the live feed from the library's security cameras on my phone. Torin was banging on the glass doors, his hat falling off as he panicked. He didn't realize that when I fixed the system for him, I had hard-coded his biometric signature into a permanent threat alert. The delete button was a honeypot I had designed just for him. I watched as 3 police cars pulled into the library parking lot. Torin's final act of sabotage had ended with him being caught in a public library like a common criminal. A few weeks later, I was walking down the street when I saw 2 familiar figures sitting outside a dive bar on the edge of the industrial district. It was Torin and Eldrick. They were sharing a single, cheap beer, looking like men who had been through a meat grinder. Their expensive suits were wrinkled and stained, and they looked 10 years older than the last time I saw them. When they saw me walking toward them, they didn't shout. They just looked at me with a mixture of confusion and exhaustion. "How did you do it, Cosima?" Eldrick asked, his voice hollow. "You were just a quiet girl, you were always in the basement. How did a nerd like you take down 2 men like us?" Torin nodded, his eyes unfocused. "We were the visionaries, we were the face of the future, you were just it." I stopped in front of them and looked down. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a strange sense of closure. I realized that they still didn't understand what had happened. They still thought the face was more important than the foundation. "That was your mistake," I said, my voice calm. "You ignored the woman who holds the keys to your world. You thought I was IT, just a girl who fixes computers and brings you lattes. But I wasn't just it. I was the infrastructure. I built the walls you lived in, the servers you used, and the very ground you stood on. You thought you were the masters of the universe, but you were just guests in a world I created." I turned and walked away, leaving them in the shadow of the bar, finally understanding that they had never really been in charge. The legal battle wasn't entirely over. Eldrick's lawyer, a man named Lennox, tried to file for a massive divorce settlement. He stood in court and argued that Eldrick was entitled to half of my new company because we were married during its growth phase. He talked about marital assets and shared sacrifice. He tried to make Eldrick look like the supportive husband who had funded my early career. Eldrick sat at the table, looking hopeful for the first time in weeks. He thought he could still win a share of my wealth. I stood up and handed a single piece of paper to the judge. "Your Honor, Mr. Lennox is correct that we were married 5 years ago. However, the marriage was never legally finalized." The room went silent. Eldrick frowned, looking confused. I explained that 5 years ago, Eldrick had insisted on handling the filing of our marriage license after the ceremony. But I had found the original license tucked away in a safe deposit box last week, unsigned and unfiled. Eldrick had kept it, just in case. He wanted an easy out. Not realizing, he just gave me one. Since the license was never filed with the state, we were never legally husband and wife, I said. There are no marital assets. There is no shared company. Eldrick is a legal stranger to my finances. The judge reviewed the document and nodded. The case was dismissed in less than 10 minutes. Eldrick realized then that his own backup plan to abandon me had been the very thing that saved me from him. He walked out of the courtroom with nothing, the victim of his own lack of commitment. I officially launched my new firm, Karma Systems, a week later. We moved out of the Vanguard building and into a state-of-the-art facility downtown. My first hire wasn't a fancy executive or a high-priced marketing guru. It was Silas, the former CFO Torin had tried to ruin. I put him in charge of our ethics and transparency department. No shell companies, Silas, I told him. We build everything in the light. Silas looked at me with tears in his eyes. I never thought I'd see a company run like this, Cosima. Our first major contract wasn't with a tech giant or a fashion mogul. It was with the federal government. They had hired us to perform a complete, deep-dive audit of every one of Torin and Eldrick's former associates. I made sure we started with the people who had laughed the loudest when Torin poured coffee on my laptop. One by one, we found the tax evasion, the fraud, and the hidden kickbacks. We weren't just a tech company. We were a cleaning crew, scrubbing the industry of the rot that people like Torin had left behind. I sat in my new office, which was on the top floor and filled with sunlight. I didn't have a mahogany table or silk handkerchiefs. I had a comfortable chair, a powerful workstation, and a team of people who respected each other. I realized that karma wasn't just a name for the company. It was the reality of the world. If you build something on a foundation of lies and cruelty, it will eventually fall. But if you build it on truth and talent, it will stand forever. I was no longer the invisible architect. I was the owner of the skyline. A year later, I was back in the boardroom of the old Vanguard building, which I had recently purchased and renamed. I sat at the head of the table, the same spot where Torin had humiliated me. I looked across the room at our new IT intern, a young girl who looked just as nervous and determined as I once was. She was holding a cracked tablet and explaining a new security protocol to the senior staff. I saw some of the older executives starting to smirk, ready to dismiss her because of her age. I stood up and walked around the table. I stopped next to her and placed my hand on her shoulder. The room went silent instantly. I reached into my bag and pulled out a brand new top-of-the-line laptop, the best one money could buy. I placed it in front of her. Then I walked to the break area, poured a cup of coffee, and brought it back to her desk. "Here you go," I said with a warm smile. "And remember, never let them call you just the IT girl. You are the heart of this building." I walked to the window as the sun began to set over the city. I looked at the skyscrapers, and for a moment, the lights in my building began to dim and brighten in a rhythmic pattern. It was a code I had programmed into the smart grid long ago, a message in Morse code that spelled out "reboot complete." The old world of Vanguard was gone, and the new world of Karma was just beginning. I took a sip of my coffee and looked at my reflection in the glass. I wasn't smoke anymore. I was the light.